the studio. By studio, I mean our kitchen.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we've been here.
Yes, because Naomi keeps running off and having wild adventures without me.
I don't think you want to be stuck in a hotel room with me and my boyfriend.
You don't know what I want.
Can we open our drinks now?
Why don't we introduce what this podcast is, Naomi?
But, okay, fine. Hello. Welcome back to Why Would No One Date These Guys with Naomi and Joel Guy, a podcast exploring sex, dating, and relationships among millennials and Zoomers.
And the reason no one wants to date Joel is because he's constantly talking over and demeaning women. Yeah, let's try a drink.
Why does it sound like it's carbonated? This week, we are trying 100% mango juice from Carabo Mangoes. So I'm guessing these are like the Asian mangoes that you find in the Asian markets.
It's tasty is what it is. Honestly, this can could be like half as big. This is very sweet. It
kind of smells like V8.
You're not wrong. I don't know if that's because they like use the same gases or whatever to preserve it. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's basically a mango, but in liquid form. If you like mangoes, you might like this, but it's a lot. It's very sweet. I'm trying to think, could you maybe like turn this into
we're
like
supposed to shake it.
Mango yogurt drink or something? Oh, what is that? Lassi? Maybe do a lassi with it?
I like the idea, but I feel like I've had way too much mango in the last 24 hours. I ate mango sorbet yesterday.
Why were you sad, Naomi? Let's talk about our week briefly.
Okay, well, I had the perfect schedule last semester for like classes and stuff, and I like really got used to it, and I was really happy with it. And then this semester, I have a lot of like things that I have my hands in, but I'm stuck at home.
Fellas.
Ew. I'm stuck at home because I've been trying to isolate as much as possible just because of the new variant. So I have been like at home most of the time. I only have one class in person. My internship's online. The only time I get out of the house is when I'm working or at that one class. So that has not been fun on my mental health, but we're working on it. So I ate mango sorbet. Also, Joel was so sad yesterday. Why were you sad yesterday?
Work's been a lot. I've had to work a lot of overtime, and I don't like my new job responsibilities. And I like speaking so vaguely and carefully monitored tones about my place of employment.
No, I think it's really good that you're doing that just so the certain small amount that we get paid every single month by our Patreon users is not spent on legal services.
That's a really good point, Naomi. Yeah, my employer made it clear as the policies of the employer that representatives of said employer should never introduce themselves as working for that employer unless someone deliberately asks them whether or not they're affiliated with said employer. And if you are listening and you know what I do, that sentence will make a lot more sense.
What if I trapped you one week and I was just like, so, Joel, do you work for ... organization?
Well, then I just edit it out because I edit these episodes.
Yeah, but maybe this is one of the episodes that I'll edit.
Unlikely, but possible. So yeah, like I am looking for employment elsewhere.
We're manifesting a really nice, well-paying job for Joel where he doesn't have to work a lot of overtime. He can work like a couple of hours a week, but not the amount that he's been working.
And then I can be a better relationship guru.
Better co-host.
Better boyfriend. All these things all at once.
Well, I miss Lauren.
So speaking of being a better boyfriend, Naomi, today I want to talk about the book, The Gift of Fear, which is all about horrible, horrible boyfriends. No, it's not all about horrible boyfriends. It's about, quote, survival signals that protect us from violence. So the reason I want to talk about this book is because, as I mentioned on past episodes, I spend a probably above average amount of time on different subreddits that focus on women-centered issues, and
Joel's a feminist.
A number of blogs written by women for women that deal with women's issues. And I kept seeing this book over and over and over again, and I always find that interesting when someone or people are constantly referencing one text. And often that means either that text is really, really good or really, really bad, like in a trashy way.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not judging people who enjoy, trashy books. I do think there's a lot of amazing literature out there, and your time might be better spent in reading other stuff. But in this case, this seems to be a book that a lot of women have found useful to protect themselves and kind of rethink situations such as relationships that they find themselves in. It's a book about dangerous individuals, why they're dangerous, how to identify traits of dangerous situations, and then hopefully how to escape them. So in theory, it's a very good reference. And I do have some criticisms of it, and I don't really want to get into that unless we, turn this into a two-parter episode, and then I'll have some time near the end to discuss it. For the most part, I would recommend this. I think it's a really insightful book, and there's some very clear takeaways, and we're not going to be able to summarize everything because, this thing is, golly, 350 pages. So, I would urge you, if you, are interested in the episode, to still pick up a copy. There's a lot of anecdotes I've trimmed out in an effort to make this, more straightforward. So, yeah, read it, but keep in mind that there's a couple of caveats I want to throw in near the end that I feel are worth bringing up.
I think that this book is like the book Why Does He Do That?, which I did a book report on recently. And it's a book where you when you're annotating a book and you're like, oh, this is important, or oh, this is important, you highlight it, or you make a note of it or something. I felt like I had to highlight the entire book.
That seems like a waste of a marker. Yeah, just get the highlighted edition.
Yeah.
So this book is written by Gavin de Becker. Gavin de Becker is an American author and security specialist, primarily for governments, large corporations, and public figures. He is the chairman of the aptly named Gavin de Becker and Associates Foundation, which he founded in 1978. So this is just some stuff on Wikipedia. In the 1980s, together with the United States Marshal Service, de Becker co-designed the Mosaic Threat Assessment System, which is used to screen threats to justices of the Supreme Court of the United States, members of the United States Congress, and senior officials of the Central Intelligence Agency. Los Angeles County law enforcement agencies adopted Mosaic in 1997 to help police manage and reduce spousal abuse cases that might escalate to homicide. In 1999, he assisted the United States Secret Service in the development of its Guide for Protective Intelligence and Threat Assessment Investigations. This is someone who has a storied career of threat assessment and developing tools to aid personal and public safety. He's well regarded in government and law enforcement, but that might come with its own baggage, which we'll discuss later. The reason I bring all that up is this is someone who understands security. He's not just talking out of his butt. This is stuff that's based on his personal experiences and decades of working within this field. I did like an anecdote near the bottom of his Wikipedia page, and that is he gave a eulogy at Carrie Fisher's memorial service.
This is so funny.
Fisher and de Becker reportedly attended high school together, and they are described as friends. The first time I had sex was at Carrie's house, he stated in the eulogy, and added, it wasn't with Carrie, but she arranged it.
Is she a madam?
I can't imagine a situation where I would be giving a eulogy and being like, this person helped me bone down. I am so grateful this person helped me bone down.
It was the first time he boned.
It was the first time he boned. But she was the inciting incident in many ways. Carrie Fisher, a woman of many talents.
Carrie Fisher.
Yeah. So, without further ado, I want to, just get into it. So I've broken this up into a couple of different sections. Part one, we're probably going to do a two-parter. I would say is going to be
come back next week for the second part of this book report.
Is going to be about why people don't trust their intuition even when they should, and then how to come up with useful assessments of people. And then, we might also get into violence markers. We'll see. This could be longer or shorter than I anticipate. There's going to be a lot of reading involved.
Sit back, make some popcorn, get ready to really dive into your intuition.
Yeah. So, without further ado, I'm going to crack this tome open and start reading. So, let's talk about the foreword of this newest edition, which is published in 2021. He says, in 2009, Oprah Winfrey kindly dedicated an hour-long show to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the publication of this book. My publisher rushed to get a bunch more copies into print. Taken all together, The Gift of Fear has been published in 25 editions across 24 years, including the original hardcover, paperback versions, audiobooks, Kindle editions, and 18 foreign language translations. One question he constantly asks himself is, should he add additional information to the book? 9/11, for instance, internet and social networking have become more important since he originally published it. Should he include that? Should the book also have new content about COVID, given that lockdowns precipitate violence in certain scenarios? And he's found that over and over again that the fundamentals of human violence and the fundamentals of safety don't change, even with new issues involved. He talks about stalking and harassment, giving the increased role of internet in our lives more prominence. And he says that perpetrators now have a wider menu of intrusive strategies than when the book was first published. And unfortunately, the internet also offers greater anonymity to unwanted pursuers and less privacy to their targets. He also says social networking has changed the way people come into one another's lives, and though offering women some insulation at the start of relationships, online services also present one's image and information to a larger population that might be wise. So, it's his belief that the strategies predators use while grooming and persuading targets and the strategies used by abusers are the same whether applied via internet, email, text messaging, social networks, telephone, snail mail, or face-to-face. Media changes, he says, but human nature does not. The best safety strategy remains exactly the same as it has been throughout human history. Avoid being in the presence of someone you feel might do you wrong. Any initial thoughts on that, Naomi?
I think that's a very good way of putting it very simply.
Yeah, and I don't think he's saying, I don't think he's victim blaming in any way. He's not saying, if you were in the presence of someone who you felt harmed by, you're responsible for what occurs. I think, he recognizes that throughout the book, he comes up with a number of reasons people might put themselves in situations where they themselves are in danger. I think rather what he's saying is, if you feel uncomfortable, trust the fact that you feel uncomfortable. It's possible your instincts might lead you awry, but more often than not, there's something that, is at the back of your mind, which is urging you to explore the situation more thoroughly.
I think that it's good, that advice is not only good for physical, but also emotional safety, just because you want to be around people that bring you light and joy, and you don't want to be around people that you're constantly questioning their true intentions.
Right. If you constantly feel that every conversation is a minefield that you have to navigate, you probably aren't getting a lot from that relationship.
Yep.
Unless you work in the army and every conversation is about minefields. That's its own.
Or you're in a minefield while having that conversation.
That's also a really good
point.
Yeah. Mines are bad, people. Don't support governments that use them. Okay, so he then jumps ahead and talks about the fact that a lot of people make good predictions. A lot of people probably listening to that are like, well, I don't always have the best judgment. Maybe I make, bad decisions. He's like, no. People are constantly presenting yourself to you, and you are intuitively making judgments about their character. So he says on page 11, whether it is learned the easy way or the hard way, the truth remains that your safety is yours. It is not the responsibility of the police, the government, industry, the apartment building manager, or the security company. Too often, we take the lazy route and invest our confidence without ever evaluating if it is earned. Has the security industry earned your confidence? Has government earned it? We have a Department of Justice, but it would be more appropriate to have a Department of Violence Prevention, because that's what we need and that's what we care about. Justice is swell, but safety is survival. It may be hard to accept intuition's importance, because intuition is often looked upon us by thoughtful Western human beings with contempt. It is often described as emotional, unreasonable, or inexplicable. Husbands chide their wives about feminine intuition. Boy, this book was originally written in the 1990s. And don't take it seriously. If intuition is used by a woman to explain some choices she made or concerns she can't let go of, men roll their eyes and write it off. We much prefer logic, the grounded, explainable, unemotional thought process that ends in a supportable conclusion. In fact, Americans worship logic, even when it's wrong, and deny intuition, even when it's right. Men, of course, have their own version of intuition, not so light and inconsequential, they tell themselves, as that feminine stuff. Theirs is a more viscerally named gut feeling, but it isn't just a feeling. It's a process more extraordinary and ultimately more logical in the natural order than the most fantastic computer calculations. It is our most complex cognitive process and at the same time, the simplest. Intuition connects us to the natural world and to our nature. Freed from the bonds of judgment, married only to perception, it carries us to predictions we will later marvel at. Someone I knew, we will say about the chance meeting we predicted, or about somehow I knew, we will say about the chance meeting we predicted, or about the unexpected phone call from a distant friend, or the unlikely turnaround in someone's behavior, or about violence we steered clear of, or, too often, the violence we elected not to steer clear of. Somehow I knew. So, it's his belief that, ultimately you do have to take some degree of responsibility for your own safety. And while I think he reiterates over and over again that there are resources out there that are meant to assist, he's also like, look, there is a lot of stuff that can't be easily tracked or monitored by outside institutions. And so at some point you're going to have to take a degree of responsibility if your safety is important to you, which it really rides the line of victim blaming, but I don't feel goes over.
I do think that a lot of people have different ways of explaining this form of intuition. Like you mentioned gut feelings and stuff. I actually did a report on gut feelings based off of a scientific article. If you go to PubMed or something, you can look into this and actually read the article. I did it freshman year of high school. And it just talked about the fact that like you should trust your gut feelings because more often than not, and this was scientifically proven in a like scientifically backed article, that your gut feelings will, if you trust your gut feelings, they will not lead you astray.
I don't know how you would scientifically prove that.
You know what? Read the article. I don't remember what it was about. I just remember doing the part. So go to PubMed, find it.
You could not be more vague. If you can find it, send me a link and I'll put it in the episode description.
Awesome.
Great. So now the other thing he wants to point out is that a lot of people think of violence as senseless. So for instance, he gives the example on page 15 of watching a Jane Goodall documentary showing a group of chimpanzees stalking and killing one another. And they, you might look at that and say that the unprovoked attack is territorialism or population control, and that with similar certainty we say we understand the cause and purpose of violence by every creature on Earth except ourselves. And he says a lot of people make this mistake. They think that animals, will hunt for food or fun. You ever seen like a cat playing with like a mouse or a, bird? You'll understand that like a lot of animals have a purpose behind their actions, even if those actions end in violence and the death of creatures. But at the same time, we kind of presume that a lot of violence in like the human world is random. And I think a lot of our media has, violent individuals who have like sociopathic, psychopathic characteristics, or just they're crazy, right? And that's supposed to be the explanation. But he says it's also incomplete. The human violence we abhor and fear the most, that which we call random and senseless, is neither. It always has a purpose and meaning, to the perpetrator at least. We may not choose to explore or understand that purpose, but it is there, and as long as we label it senseless, we'll not make sense of it. Sometimes a violent act is so frightening that we call the perpetrator a monster, but as you'll see, it is by finding his humanness, his similarity to you and me, that such an act can be predicted. Though you're about to learn new facts and concepts about violent people, you will find most of the information resonating somewhere in your own experience. You will even see esoteric types of violence have detectable patterns and warning signs. You'll also see that the most mundane types of violence, those that we all relate to on some level, such as violence between angry, intimate people, are as knowable as affection between intimate individuals. In fact, violence has fewer varieties than the love. So I think that's an important thing to understand too, because again, when we talk about safety, a lot of people think that danger is something you can't predict, when in fact, like, often a lot of danger in your life is going to come from individuals who are closest to you. And that's, like, unfortunately reality that, like, most abuse, most violence, most sexual assaults come from people that, like, the individuals who were affected knew. And so it's important to, kind of have this understanding that, no, it's not something that can, hit you like a bolt of lightning. It's something that's far more predictable, like, whether or not the sun's going to rise in the morning. Does that sound too negative?
No.
Okay. I don't want this to be a total buzzkill episode, as much as I like buzzkills. Okay, so we've established that, like, intuition is beneficial. We've established that violence is something we need prepared for. And the question he asks then is, why is it we don't trust our intuition? And he kind of, like, got into that earlier when he said that men make fun of women for having their intuition. But I think both men and women, independent of that, are constantly second-guessing themselves, and I feel it's worth diving into that. So one example he gives is that even experts rely on intuition, but often neglect it. And, he gives an example of a police officer who made some informed decisions and was able to avoid violence. But another more practical example he gives is many experts lose the creativity and imagination of the less informed. They are so intimately familiar with known patterns, they may fail to recognize or respect the importance of the new wrinkle. The process of applying expertise is, after all, the editing out of unimportant details in favor of those known to be relevant. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "The mind of the beginner is empty, free of the habits of the expert, ready to accept, to doubt, and open to all the possibilities." People enjoying so-called beginner's luck prove this all the time. Even men of science rely on intuition, both knowingly and unknowingly. The problem is, we discourage them from doing it. Imagine that you go to see a doctor, a specialist in some particular malady, and before you even sit down in his examining room, he says, "You're fine. Please pay my receptionist on the way out." You might understandably feel that the opinion he rendered intuitively was not worth paying for, though it might be the exact same diagnosis you would get after his poking and prodding you with fancy equipment. A friend of mine who is a doctor has to prove his scientific acumen to patients before they'll accept his intuition. I call it the tap dance. After I do a few steps, patients say, "Okay, I see you can dance," and then they believe me. One good example of this is I had a physical checkup last year, and I've been having some back pain that was, like, recurring. It wasn't constant, but it kind of came and went. and it would spur back for a couple of days after I did some squats at the gym. And so like I noticed this pattern and I was really confused by it because other than that specific motion, like I wasn't experiencing any back pain. And so I brought this up when I was having my physical, and he was like, lean back. And I leaned back on the weird paper covered bed. I don't know what you call it, exam
table. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't get the paper. I understand from a sterility standpoint, but I don't know.
It doesn't even cover the entire like exam table. Yeah. So I just like, I'm with you. I don't understand it either.
So I lie back and he like just grabs my legs and pulls them upwards. And so it's like I'm sitting down, but my legs are sticking up in the air as I lie on the back.
So your legs are in imaginary stirrups.
Yeah, it was like a gynecology exam. No, but they were like pointed straight up. And he looks at him and says, "Oh yeah, your hip bone's misaligned." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, like it looks like one of your feet is about a ½ inch longer than the other foot. And that's almost always caused by your hip being slightly misaligned. So here's a number for a chiropractor." And
is it fixed?
No. I have not yet gotten to a chiropractor. But again, like almost immediately with a very poor description on my part of what the problem was, he was able to like quickly diagnose it. And it could have been, I don't know, a slipped disc. It could have been like permanent spinal damage. It could have been all of my head. I don't know. But like I was impressed by that. And clearly like this is something he'd done before.
And
like,
that probably costs you like $800 for him to just do that really quick.
I have decent insurance. No,
you don't need to go into specifics. I was just saying, like, it was him just like eyeing you and seeing, yeah. My examination table experience was just last week, and I'm telling you why I don't understand examination paper. So it was on examination table. I was on it, and then I was in for a gynecological exam, and she put an extra sheet of paper under where my butt was gonna be, and I was like, if there's paper here, why put more paper down?
Yeah, it's strange. Could you just have like a fake leather surface and then wipe it down with like a wipe after every?
Well, it is like faux leather.
Yeah.
But like I understand what you're saying, but I think they're just being extra sterile. I don't even know if they like wipe down that fake leather.
Look, this is not a medical podcast, so like please don't take any of our advice as doctors are idiots. We're the idiots. We have no context for any of this. Another interesting thing he points out is that often we don't trust our intuition, but animals do, if that makes any sense. So on page 31, he says, "How many times have you said after following one course, 'No, I shouldn't have done that'? That means you got the signal and then didn't follow it. We all know how to respect intuition, though often not our own. For example, people tend to invest all kinds of intuitive ability in dogs, a fact I was reminded of recently when a friend told me this story. Ginger had a really bad reaction to our new building contractor. She even growled at him. She seemed to sense that he isn't trustworthy, so I'm going to get some bids from other people. That must be it, I joked with her. The dog feels you should get another general contractor because this one's not honest. The irony, I explained, is that it's far more likely Ginger is reacting to your signals than you're reacting to hers. Ginger is an expert at reading you, and you are the expert at reading other people. Ginger, smart as she is, knows nothing about the ways a contractor might inflate the cost to his own profit, or about whether he is honest, or about the benefits of a cost plus 15% versus a fixed bid, or about the somewhat hesitant recommendation you got from a former client of that builder, or about the too fancy car he arrived in, or about the slick but evasive answer he gave to your pointed question. My friend laughed at the revelation that Ginger, whose intuition she was quick to overrate, is actually a babbling idiot when it comes to remodel work. In fact, Ginger is less than that because she can't even babble. But he does say if there are dogs out there intuitive enough to detect what's being read by their masters, I take it all back. So, Ginger does sense and react to fear in humans because she knows instinctively that a frightened person is more likely to be dangerous, but she has nothing you have. The problem, in fact, is an extra something you have that a dog doesn't. It's judgment, and that's what gets in the way of your perception and intuition. With judgment comes the ability to disregard your own intuition unless you can explain it logically, the eagerness to judge and convict your own feelings rather than honor them. Ginger is not distracted by the way things could be, used to be, or should be. She only perceives what is. Our reliance on the intuition of a dog is often a way to find permission to have an opinion we might otherwise be forced to call, God forbid, unsubstantiated.
You started the story, and I thought Ginger was a human, and so when you said Ginger growled, I was like, that's a weird reaction.
I'm glad you're paying attention.
No, I knew this story was about a dog, but you just referred to Ginger. You didn't say Ginger the dog at first.
Well, I said people tend to invest all kinds of intuitive abilities in dogs.
I know. I knew this story was about dogs. You didn't.
Okay,
You didn't
fair
tell
enough.
me that Ginger was the dog.
Really pulling back the curtain, revealing our personal problems in this episode. The other, like, I don't recall where this was in the book. I'm just recalling this upon, like, reanalyzing what's discussed in it. Another example he gives is people are able to sleep really well at night in environments that they're accustomed to.
Yeah.
And he says often when you're in a new environment, like a hotel room where you've just moved into a new place, you don't have the ability to sleep well at night.
Yeah.
And his argument is the reason for that is your body is able to self-select kind of the information your brain is receiving. So initially, it's reacting to every weird noise and sound and the house settling when you first move into a place, but very quickly comes to realize some of those things aren't relevant, right? The house is going to groan and shudder every single night when it settles. That isn't something you should be worried of. And so it begins to filter that out, so you're not even processing it as a potential threat. And so another example he gives is, you might have an individual like a husband, like a wife whose husband, comes in late after a shift every night and gets into bed. And even if the wife is a light sleeper, often the husband can get into bed without disturbing her because the brain is able to process, oh, I know this individual. I know the sounds they make when they're, changing. I know the sound of them opening the door. It would be quite different if someone was, like forcing the door, trying to pick the lock, or, was louder or sounded different than normal. So I thought that was a really good explanation too, where it's like the more time you spend in an environment, the more comfortable you become with it. And so your body is able to like kind of react instinctively if there are changes to said environment. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Good. The other problem, beyond the fact that like we have judgment, is that people evaluate risk really poorly. So on page 34, he discusses that we tend to give our full attention to risks that are beyond our control, such as air crashes, nuclear plant disasters, while ignoring those we feel in charge of, dying from smoking, poor diet, and car accidents. In Why the Reckless Survive, Dr. Melvin Konner's exceptional book about you and me, he points out that we drink and drive without our seatbelts and light up another cigarette, and then cancel the trip to Europe on a 1 in a million chance of a terrorist attack. You can really tell this book was written in the 1990s because he says Arab terrorist attack, which feels pointed these days. Many Americans who wouldn't travel to see the pyramids for fear of being killed in Egypt stay home where that danger is 20 times greater. While we knowingly volunteer for some risks, we object to those imposed upon us by others. Conner notes that we seem to be saying, if I want to smoke myself to death, it's my own business, but if some company is trying to put something over on me with asbestos or nerve gas, I'll be furious. We will tolerate familiar risks over strange ones. The hijacking of an American jet in Athens looms larger in our concern than the parent who kills a child, even though one happens rarely and the other happens daily. So this ties into the whole environment thing, where like if something's familiar to you, it's going to seem less dangerous, right? There's so many things in America where it's like, oh, that person died of poverty. Oh, there's a homeless person on the street. But we don't really process those as breakdowns of the system because they've become so normal and omnipresent. However, if there's minor changes to our system, such as no more chicken nuggies at the grocery store, people start to freak out because there's always been chicken nuggies at the grocery store. Not having chicken nuggies is a problem.
Well, I think this is funny because as soon as you mentioned that as an issue where like the smoking versus like asbestos, I was thinking about these videos that I kept seeing like as soon as the vaccine was like being rolled out, like the COVID vaccine, that people were saying, oh, I don't know what's in it, blah, blah, blah. But then they'd like light up a cigarette. So I was just thinking about that, like, oh, I don't want to get a COVID vaccine, but like I'll continue to smoke my, I don't know what kind of chemicals are in these cigarettes.
Right. And you can see that with so many like American health risks. Climate change, for instance, has become like, in a way, so understood by people, it's no longer as much of a threat because like everyone seems to be okay with it just continuing its course. So We're not freaking out constantly. Or American obesity and, individuals who are overweight, unfortunately, have higher risk of many health conditions. But because so many in American society are like, yeah, I'm overweight, all the health articles from the 1990s talking about this being a problem have kind of like vanished from public consciousness. The other thing he points out on page 35 is one reason we don't have to develop our own predictive skills is we live in a world where experts will tell us what to do. Catherine, a young woman of 27, asks me, the expert, a question nearly all women in a society must consider. How can I tell if a man I date is turning into a problem? Is there a checklist of warning signs about stalkers? Instead of asking her question directly, I ask her to give an example of what she means. Well, she says, I dated this guy named Brian who got sort of obsessed with me, wouldn't let go, and I wanted to stop seeing him. We met at a party with a friend of mine. He must have asked someone for my number. Before he even got home, he left me 3 messages. I told him I didn't want to go out with him, but he was so enthusiastic about it I didn't have any choice. We dated for about a month. Meaning he was super attentive, always seemed to know what I wanted. He remembered everything I said. It was flattering, but also made me a little uncomfortable. Like when I mentioned needing more space for our books, he showed up one day with shelves and all this stuff and just put them up. I couldn't say no. He read so much into whatever I said. Once I asked if I go to a basketball game with him, and I said maybe. He later said, "You promised." Also, he talked about serious things so early, like living together and marriage and children. He started with jokes about stuff like that the first time we went out, and later he wasn't joking. When he suggested that I have a phone in my car, I wasn't sure if he even wanted a car phone, but he borrowed my car one day and just had one installed. It was a gift, so what could I say? And of course, he called me whenever I was in the car, and is so adamant that I never speak to my own ex-boyfriend on my car phone. Later, he got angry if I spoke to my ex at all. There were also a couple of my friends he didn't like me to see, and he stopped spending time with his own friends. Finally, when I told him I didn't want to be his girlfriend, he refused to hear it. He basically insisted I stayed in a relationship with him, and when I wouldn't, he forced me into a relationship of sorts by always calling, showing up, sending gifts, talking to my friends, coming to my work uninvited. We'd only known each other for about a month, but he acted like it was the most important relationship of his life. So, what are the warning signs of a bad guy?
The fact that you just read that so fast literally gave me so many icky feelings. Like, it made me so nervous on top of that nervous story that you just
good.
repeated.
This is me exploiting the audio medium.
I feel like I'm talking so slow right now. Like, I feel like I'm talking like, no.
Yeah. So the point he's trying to make is there are a hell of a lot of warning signs in this person's life.
Yeah.
That she's disregarding because she thinks an expert can give her a better opinion.
Yeah.
And his advice is listen to yourself.
Yeah, that's the intuition, is like, you know exactly what the issues are. And like, friends come to me all the time and they're like, well, here's the issue, and here's the issue. What should I do about it? I'm like, if they're issues, fix them or go get out of the relationship.
Yeah. There's also another way we get into trouble, and that is we're told constantly inaccurate information. And this prevents us from being able to use accurate information when making judgments about people. So he gives an example that during a presentation for hundreds of government threat advisors at the Central Intelligence Agency a few years prior, he made a point by drawing on a very rare safety hazard, kangaroo attacks. Now, Naomi, you might know this, but about 20 people a year are killed by the normally friendly animals, and kangaroos always display a specific set of indicators before they attack.
In boxing matches?
I think just randomly in the wild.
Oh, okay.
That's not the point of this anecdote.
No,
so there's
I know.
three things. There's 3 things, Naomi, that you
Yeah.
need to remember about kangaroos before they attack.
Okay.
The first thing, they will give what appears to be a wide and genial smile. They'll smile really wide like the Joker.
That's really creepy.
And the reason they do that is because they're actually showing their teeth to scare off predators.
Oh, okay.
Okay, second thing. They will check their pouches compulsively several times to make sure they have no young with them.
Yeah.
They will never attack when carrying young, because they want to keep their young safe.
Fair.
And the third thing is they will look behind them, since they always retreat immediately after the kill. So Naomi, what are the 3 things kangaroos will do?
Smile.
Smile.
Look for young in their pouches.
Mm-hmm.
And then look behind them so that they can escape.
Right. And those are all intuitive things.
Yeah.
Because, like, we understand what a kangaroo looks like. We understand its needs. We understand where you might encounter one. That all makes sense in your environment. So after those 3 signals, kangaroos will then lunge, brutally pummel an enemy, and gallop off.
Damn.
So we asked, after sharing this anecdote, 2 audience members to stand up and repeat back the warning signs, and they both, like you, Naomi, flawlessly described the smile, the checking of the pouch for young, and the looking back for an escape route. In fact, everyone in that room will now remember those warning signs for life. If you are ever face-to-face with a kangaroo, Naomi, be it tomorrow or decades from now, those 3 pre-incident indicators will be in your mind.
Wait, so should I like run in the opposite direction if this ever happens to me?
The problem, Naomi, is he made up all those signals.
What?
He did it to demonstrate the risks of inaccurate information. He knows nothing about kangaroo behavior, so forget the 3 signals if you can, or stay away from hostile kangaroos. But you can see how that's like such an appealing anecdote, right? Everyone is searching out for information. Everyone wants to be more knowledgeable and an expert in something. And the way they go about that knowledge is different. You know, some people trust like random stuff they find on Facebook. Other people will, you know, read articles and attempt to discern some higher truth. But yeah, like we're constantly bombarded with information, even if we're not even seeking it out. And so this becomes a big problem where even people who care about their safety, even people who care about wanting to be better, are often given information that isn't actually helpful. I've always thought that like a lot of information given about liars seems weird. Like all this information is, oh, well, liars will look down at their shoes and they'll, you know, be twitching and they'll look everywhere. And all that seems really unintuitive to me. And I still don't know if a lot of that is accurate. I don't know what any of that is based on. I feel that's more of like police officers who think they have the criminal element pegged, coming up with some characteristics that some criminals might, utilize, some liars might utilize in questioning. But yeah, like there's just a lot of information out there, and even in our high-tech, incredible world today, it's still difficult to discern what is true and what is not. So James Burke, many years ago says, "You are what you know." He explained that 15th century Europeans knew everything that in the sky rotated around the Earth, and then Galileo's telescope changed that truth. Today, Burke notes, we live according to yet another truth, and like the people of the past, we disregard phenomena which do not fit our view because they were wrong or outdated. Like our ancestors, we must know the real truth. When it comes to safety, there's a lot of real truth to go around, and some of it puts people at risk. For example, is it always best for a woman being stalked by an ex-husband to get a restraining order? This currently is the conventional wisdom, yet women are killed every day by men they have court orders against, and these often useless documents are found by police in the purse or the pocket of the victims. Perhaps the greatest false truth is that some people are just not intuitive, as if this key survival element was somehow left out of them. So he gives an example of a friend, Cynthia, who is a substitute school teacher, and one day when they were having lunch, she said she just wasn't intuitive. I almost never see the signs until it's too late. I don't have that inner voice some people have. But then he reminds her that several times a week she enters a room full of 6- and 7-year-old children she's never met before, and quickly makes automatic, unconscious assessments of their behavior. With amazing accuracy, she predicts who among them will seek to test her the most, who will encourage the other children to misbehave or behave, and whom the other children will will follow, what discipline strategies will work best, and so on and so on. That's true, she says. Every day I have to predict what the kids will do, and I succeed for reasons I can't explain. After a thoughtful pause, she adds, but I can't predict the behavior of adults. This is interesting because the range of behavior children might engage in is far, far greater than it is for adults. Few adults will suddenly throw something across the room and then break into laughter. Few women will, without apparent reason, lift their skirts above their heads or reach over to the next desk at work and grab the eyeglasses right off someone's face. Few adults will pour paint on the floor and then smear it around with their feet. Yet each of these behaviors is familiar to substitute teachers. Predicting the routine behavior of adults in the same culture is so simple. In fact, we rarely even bother to do it consciously. We react only to the unusual, which is a signal that there might be something worth predicting. The man sitting next to us on the plane for 5 hours gets very little of our attention, until, out of the corner of our eye, we see he's reading the magazine in our hand. The point is we intuitively evaluate people all the time, quite attentively, but they only get our conscious attention when there is a reason. We see it all, but we edit most of it out. Thus, when something does call out to us, we ought to pay attention. For many people, that's a muscle that they don't exercise. What do you feel about that?
I don't know. I just have gotten to the point in my life where safety is my main priority every single time I leave the house.
Awesome.
So yeah, I know.
Loving that
yesterday
for you.
I was walking past this guy in the grocery store, and he was staring at me as I was walking by him, and then he continued, I could see out of the corner of my eye, he continued to stare at me. So then my intuition was, oh my God, what if he follows me out to the parking lot? So I very slowly checked out all my groceries. And then I was watching him in the self-checkout camera.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching him out of the corner, the side of it, because he was also checking out at the same time. And then he left. I was okay, I have my taser in one hand. I'm ready to leave. I just can't imagine not having intuition like that.
Awesome. Loving that for
I don't
you.
have intuition about 6- and 7-year-olds. Maybe.
Maybe. You do babysitting right now.
Yeah, I do. But all of them are so different. I had a kid last week, literally just spend the entire time I was there on Minecraft with his friend Chris. And he was just screaming at Chris. He was like, Chris, you're making me so angry right now. And I was I never would have guessed that this small child, when his parents left, would act like this.
Fair enough. The only thing I really remember from the grocery store closest to our house is the time I was getting groceries at 6 or 7 o'clock on a Saturday, and 2 shirtless guys walked in and down the beer aisle, and they grabbed 2 32 packs of cheap beer, slung them over their shoulders, and then walked to the self-checkout to pay for it. And I was yeah, that tracks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have any anecdotes of people at the store. I can definitely tell you, I've been to the store a couple of times. Oh, these are the employees that they have. And these are typically when they're going to be there, and other details like that. But yeah, most of it, the faces, the activities of individuals, it's all filtered out. And part of that, I would say, is both unconscious filtering and then deliberate. I recognize it's weird to be stared at and analyzed by people in public, so I am not going around staring at and analyzing people in public.
Yeah.
And so there's opportunities I might have to identify weird aspects that I just don't consciously notice because I'm trying to not, bother people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He gives an example later of a problem that people have is they again, because they're bad at assessing risk, will do things like go out in public with headphones in. And he's like, this is a big issue because, one, you're drawing your attention away from the things around you, which is really bad. But two, you're also signaling to other people by the fact you have headphones in that you have less attentiveness.
Yeah.
And so he says, if you're in a high danger situation, don't do this. Don't, take away your attention and make it clear you have less attention. This is a big problem.
That's what's great about having long hair. You can just cover your ears and then nobody knows that you're just very zoned out.
As Naomi does constantly in class.
Yep, that's what I get. I pay them to do. Zone out.
Okay, so we've talked about why we don't trust our intuition and some of the societal reasons that might be the case. And I now think it's worth talking about how to use sort of some of the useful things he talks about in assessing other people. And so on page 56, he begins by talking about criminal characteristics. He says that as a child, I was left with pastimes that crossed time, worrying and predicting. I could see a vision of the future better than most people because the present did not distract me. This single-mindedness is another characteristic common to many criminals. Even things that would frighten most people could not distract me as a boy, for I'd become so familiar with the danger that it no longer caused alarm. Just as a surgeon loses his aversion to gore, so does the violent criminal. You can spot this feature in people who do not react as you might to shocking things. When everyone else who just witnessed a hostile argument is shaken up, for example, this person is calm. Another characteristic common to predatory criminals, and many other people as well, is their perceived need to be in control. Think of someone you know who you might call a control freak. That person, like many violent people, grew up in a chaotic, violent, or addictive home. At a minimum, it was a home where the parents did not act consistently and reliably, a place where love was uncertain or conditional. For him or her, controlling others became the only certain way to predict their behavior. People can be very motivated to become control experts because an inability to predict behavior is absolutely intolerable for human beings and every other social animal. The fact that many people act predictably is literally what holds human societies together. In sharing these few features, I do not mean to say that all men who are reckless are brave, who are calm when others are alarmed, and who seek to be in control are likely to be violent. These are simply three small pieces of the human violence puzzle to more formally inform your intuition. So, we're going to talk about some characteristics, and I feel it's, again, worth reiterating over and over again that, just because someone has some of these characteristics does not make them violent. It's when you start seeing a lot of these characteristics in combination where you could start to, raise your warning signs. Like a kangaroo, you got to raise your paws and show your teeth and
make sure your Joey isn't in your pouch.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of signals that can be given off by people who have the intent to do you harm. And it's really helpful, I would say, again, to get this book and have them as a reference. So now I'll break them down, but it's useful to me to read this. I would say it's useful to have this on hand as well to review it on occasion. So the signals people give off can be things such as forced teaming, charm and niceness, too many details, typecasting, loan sharking, the unsolicited promise, and discounting the word no. So the example he gives, and this is actually how he opens the book, is describing a woman named Kelly who was trying to get some groceries up to her apartment when a person she didn't know kind of came out of nowhere, talked his way into the apartment, and then assaulted her. And he said, the entire time she felt that something was off while they were talking, but was too polite to discount the fact that he might just be kind of socially awkward. Yeah. And as a result, there was an assault. So when we look at these survival signals, this individual in that situation did all of them. So the first one is forced teaming. So Kelly asked him, de Becker, what signals her attacker displayed. And I start with the one I call forced teaming. It was shown through his use of the word we. He said, I've got to help you. We've got a hungry cat up there. Forced teaming is an effective way to establish premature trust because it's a we're in the same boat attitude. And it's hard to rebuff that without feeling rude. Sharing your predicament, like being stuck in a stalled elevator, arriving simultaneously at a just-closed store, will understandably move people around social boundaries. But forced teaming is not about coincidence. It is intentional and directed and is one of the most sophisticated manipulations. The detectable signal of forced teaming is the projection of a shared purpose or experience where none exist. Both of us. We're on the same team. How are we going to handle it? Now we've done it, etc. David Mamet's film House of Games is a wonderful exploration of cons and con artists that shows forced teaming at work. A young soldier enters a Western Union office late one evening. He's anxious about whether the money he needs for a bus ticket will arrive there before Western Union closes. Another man is there, apparently in the same predicament. The two commiserate while waiting, and the man tells the soldier, "Hey, if my money comes in first, I'll give you whatever amount you need. You can send it to me when you get back to the base." The soldier is moved by the kindness, but the stranger brushes it off, saying, "You'd do the same for me." But in fact, the stranger is not in the same boat, is not expecting any money to be wired. He is a con artist. Predictably, the soldier's money is the only money to arrive, and when the Western Union office closes, he insists the stranger accept some of the cash. The best cons make the victim want to participate. Kelly did not consciously recognize what her intuition clearly knew, so she couldn't apply the simple defense for forced teaming, which is to make a clear refusal to accept the concept of partnership. I did not ask for your help, and I do not want it. Like many of the best defenses, this one has the cost of appearing rude. Kelly now knows it is a small cost, comparatively speaking. Forced teaming is done in many contexts for many reasons, but when applied by a stranger to a woman in a vulnerable situation, such as in a remote or unpopulated area, it is always inappropriate. It is not about partnership or coincidence, it is about establishing rapport, and that may or may not be all right, depending on why someone seeks rapport. Generally speaking, rapport building has a far better reputation than it deserves. It is perceived as admirable when it in fact is almost always done for self-serving reasons. Although the reasons that many people seek rapport aren't sinister, such as pleasantly conversing with someone you've just met at a party, that doesn't mean a woman must participate with every stranger who approaches her. Perhaps the most admirable reason to seek rapport would be to put someone at ease, but if that's the stranger's entire intent, a far simpler way is just leave the woman alone. I'm reminded of that conversation we had in one of our first episodes where we said one of the biggest problems women have in consent is that they don't know how to say no.
Yes.
They'll talk around it, but very rarely will they give a direct, no, I don't want to do this.
Yep.
And that's why it's so important to practice that. And I believe the example we gave was just a simple exercise of refusing to lend someone a pen. But, that applies in a lot of aspects of our lives. You have to be good at cutting through the bullshit, not dancing around and being able to articulate, I don't want to be in this situation, go away.
Yeah, and obviously, like you said, it goes hand in hand with intuition. If you aren't feeling comfortable with that person being like close to you or their body language or the things that they're saying, you simply just say no. And it's a lot easier said than done.
Of course. So the second one is charm and niceness. Charm is another overrated ability. He calls it an ability, not an inherent feature of one's personality. Charm is almost always a directed instrument, which always, like rapport building, has motive. To charm is to compel, to control by allure or attraction. Think of charm as a verb, not a trait. If you consciously tell yourself, this person is trying to charm me, as opposed to this person is charming, you'll be able to see around it. Most often, when you see what's behind charm, it won't be sinister, but other times you'll be glad you looked. One way to charm is with the smile, which Paul Ekman at the University of California Psychology Department says, the face tells us subtleties in ways that only a poet can put into words. Ekman calls the smile the most important signal of intent. He adds it is almost always the typical disguise used to mask the emotions. At the University of California, psychiatrist Leslie Brothers says, if I'm trying to deceive someone, that person has to be just a bit smarter than I am in order to see through my deceit. That means you have sort of an arms race. The predatory criminal does all he can to make that arms race look dente. Look like dente? I don't know what that means. He was so nice is a comment I often hear from people describing the man who, moments or months after his niceness, attacked them. We must learn and then teach our children that niceness does not equal goodness. Niceness is a decision, a strategy of social interaction, and it is not a character trait. People seeking to control others almost always present the image of a nice person in the beginning. Like rapport building, charm and the deceptive smile, unsolicited niceness often has a discoverable motive. Way back in 1859, in a book called Self-Help, Samuel Smiles said personality itself is plainly a vehicle for self-advancement. He wrote that men whose acts are at direct variance with their words command no respect, and what they say has little weight. Unfortunately, this isn't as true in our time. Unlike when people lived in small communities and could not escape their past behavior, we live in the age of anonymous one-time encounters, and many people have become an expert at the act of fast persuasion. Trust, formerly earned through actions, is now purchased with sleight of hand and sleight of words. I encourage women, this is Gavin, I encourage women to explicitly rebuff unwanted approaches, but I know it's difficult to do. Just as rapport building has a good reputation, explicitness applied by women in this culture has a terrible reputation. Women are expected to be warm and open, and in the context of encounters from male strangers, warmth lengthens the encounter, raises his expectations, increases his investment, and at best wastes time. At worst, it serves the man who has sinister intent by providing much of the information he will need to evaluate and then control his prospective victim. Too many details, Naomi. People who want to deceive you, I explain, will often use a simple technique which has a simple name. Too many details. The man charmed Kelly by telling a story about a cat he left unfed in a friend's apartment once. This is to convince her, oh, I need to help you get these groceries up the stairs so you can feed your own cat. His reference to leaving the door open, like ladies in old movies do, is way too many details. His volunteering that he was constantly late, saying things like, broken watch, not my fault, too many details. And this is something I find very useful. When I talked earlier about detecting liars, I've never really thought about it this way, and this feels like good advice. When people are telling the truth, they don't feel doubted, so they don't feel the need for additional support in the form of details. When people lie, however, even if what they say sounds credible to you, it doesn't sound credible to them, so they keep talking. Each detail may be only a small tack they throw on the road, but together they can stop a truck. The defense is to remain consciously aware of the context in which details are offered. Does that make sense? Because that seems really important to me. I've never understood this idea that, like, oh, liars like to talk a lot, because a lot of people like to talk a lot. But the point he makes is good, where if someone thinks their story's airtight, you know, you're like, hey, where were you last night? And you say, oh, I was in bed. They think that's good. Oh, of course I was in bed. I'm normally in bed. I'm normally going to sleep at that hour. Why would, anyone doubt that?
Yeah.
But a liar who wasn't in bed and was, instead out, I don't know, like
cheating on their girlfriend.
Good example, would be like, I was in bed. I'm in bed. Like when I'm normally in bed.
I'm always in bed at 9 p.m.
Yeah, I put my pajamas on, I get in bed. Typically I maybe, play on my phone for a couple minutes and then I go to sleep. 9 o'clock when I'm normally in bed. I'm not saying it's that explicit, but you get the idea where they know that being in bed is not a good enough excuse because there's so little evidence supporting that.
Yeah.
And so they then have to come up with a narrative that supports the idea, oh, being in bed is a normal thing.
Yeah.
And I feel I've tried to apply this since reading this book in my day-to-day life, and there's a lot of conversations I'll have with people. I'll be like, that was a weird number of details for what could have been a simple explanation. But in the same way, not to weaponize this in an arms race, but if you need to lie to someone, you want to keep it short and sweet, right? If you need to call out at work, you shouldn't say, oh, I have really bad diarrhea and it's all over the toilet.
Yeah.
Right? Like you should say, oh, I'm just feeling sick. Because a truly sick person wouldn't feel the need to justify themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there could be special situations, like if the boss you have is super critical and maybe you work for a doctor's office and so, they might know a little bit more about being sick than you do, or maybe they know you're never sick or things like that. But for the most part, you don't need to come up with highly elaborate situations to support the narrative you want.
Well, then there's also the situation where you need to come up with such a gross detail that they don't want to ask you more questions.
I think that can work. I heard using that, back in college. It's like, if you need to come up with an excuse, have this highly elaborate, crazy story that can't be checked, like horrible vomiting or something. But I think it's become a little overused where now if people provide something super gross, others might question it. I think it's become more well-known and so is less effective than it used to be.
Well, I know that if you're trying to hide from someone in public and you don't want them to look at you, people regularly look away from people getting intimate in public. So if someone's kissing another person, you usually look away. You don't stare at that person. So if you want to hide from someone in public and you don't want them to look at you, just kiss the person that you're near, and then they won't look at you. They won't stare at you.
Sure. So he continues and says, the person who recognizes the strategy of too many details sees the forest while simultaneously being able to see the few trees that really matter. When approached by a stranger while walking on some city street at night, no matter how engaging he might be, you must never lose sight of the context. He is a stranger who approached you. A good exercise is to occasionally remind yourself of where you are and what your relationship is to the people around you. With a date who stays beyond his welcome, for example, no matter how jokey or charming he may be, a woman can keep herself focused on context simply by thinking, I have asked him to leave twice. The defense for too many details is simple: bring the context into conscious thought. Another strategy, typecasting. Another strategy used in the Kelly situation is called typecasting. A man labels a woman in some slightly critical way, hoping she'll feel compelled to prove that his opinion is not accurate. I think this is also kind of what negging is. You're probably too snobbish to talk to the likes of me, a man might say, and the woman will cast off the mantle of snob by talking to him. A man tells a woman, you don't look like someone who reads the newspaper, and she sets out to prove that she is intelligent and well-informed. When Kelly refused her attacker's assistance, he said, there's such a thing as being too proud, you know, and she resisted the label by accepting his help. Typecasting almost usually involves a slight insult, and one usually that is easily to refute. But since it is the response itself that the typecaster seeks, the defense is silence, acting as if the words weren't even spoken. If you engage, you can win the point, but you might lose something greater. Not that it matters what the stranger thinks anyway, but the typecaster doesn't even believe what he says is true. He just believes that it works. That also seems, if you're trying to talk to someone, give them something that they want to fight over. You know, spur their emotions, spur their anger, and get them just engaging with you. And then you can back off and be like, look, I'm sorry, you know, and then you add in the details. It's just been a long day. Mm-hmm. I've, you know, been waiting on my train at the Western Union office, so on and so forth. Getting close, just a couple more. Another example is loan sharking. An individual wants to be allowed to help you because that would place you in his debt, and the fact you owe a person something makes it hard to ask them to leave you alone. The more traditional loan shark gladly lends one amount but cruelly collects much more. Likewise, the predatory criminal generously offers assistance, but it is always calculating the debt. The defense is to bring two rarely remembered facts into consciousness. Again, they approached me and I didn't ask for their help. Then, though the person might turn out to be just a kindly stranger, watch for other signals. We're all familiar with the stranger who offers to help a woman with her groceries. Most often, he is a fairly unsophisticated loan shark looking to pick someone up. The debt he records in his ledger can usually be paid off quite easily. Just a little talk will do it. But he has something in common with a predatory criminal who imposes his counterfeit charity into someone's life. Motive. There is no spiritually minded movement dedicated to lightening the burden of American women by carrying their groceries. At its best, loan sharking is a strategy on a par with asking a woman, "Do you come here often?" At its worst, it exploits a victim's sense of obligation and fairness. I haven't focused here on the criminal who simply walks up, displays a weapon, and demands money. That because he is distinctively more obvious than those who use the strategies I've described. It's important to clarify that forced teaming, too many details, charm, niceness, typecasting, and loan sharking are all in daily use by people who have no sinister intent. I don't mean to cramp the style of some crude Casanova, but times have changed, and we men can surely develop some techniques which are not steeped in deceit and manipulation. Look at him. What a feminist, this individual, Mr. de Becker. Okay. I think two more. Yes. So, the unsolicited promise. For the next signal, he asks Kelly to think back to the moment when she was reluctant to let her attacker into the apartment. He had said, "I'll just put this stuff down and go. I promise." The unsolicited promise is one of the most reliable signals because it is nearly always of questionable motive. Promises are used to convince us of an intention, but they are not guarantees. A guarantee is a promise that offers some compensation if the speaker fails to deliver. He commits to make it all right again if things don't go as he says they would. But promises offer no such collateral. They are the very hollowest instruments of speech, showing nothing more than the speaker's desire to convince you of something. So, aside from meeting all unsolicited promises with skepticism, whether or not they are about safety, it's useful to ask yourself, why does this person need to convince me? The answer, it turns out, is not about him. It's about you. The reason a person promises something, the reason he needs to convince you, is that he can see you are not convinced. You have doubt, which is the messenger of intuition, likely because there is room to doubt. The great gift of an unsolicited promise is that the speaker tells you so himself. Here's the defense. When someone says, "I promise," you say, even if it's just in your head, "You're right. I am hesitant about trusting you, and maybe with good reason. Thank you for pointing it out." Boy, Naomi's looking really unhappy right now.
No, I'm just like thinking about all these situations I felt like so uncomfortable, and I'm like looking back and like looking at these characteristics. I'm just like, ugh. Like it gives me so many icky feelings.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know. I don't even know if I want to do like a pickup artist episode anymore, because like you read it and a lot of their techniques just seem so overtly misogynistic or manipulative.
They're very all manipulative.
And this like is a really good rundown of a lot of the techniques that like pickup artists tell men they should be utilizing to pick up women.
Yeah.
Like negging. It's like you go up to a girl at the bar and you're like, hey, have you lost weight recently? You look great. Like the implication being that like they used to be fat or whatever. And exactly. But the whole thing is either get them into a conversation or bring down their self-esteem so that they're more likely to like go out with someone who's below them on the relative attractiveness scale.
Can I tell you this like really short story that I heard recently?
Berenstain Bears and too much candy?
No, it was this story about this woman that like every single week her boyfriend who was living with at the time would tell her that she like smelled awful. So she changed her routines, she changed her deodorant, she changed her shampoo, she changed her like laundry detergent, everything. And for years she would shower like twice a day. Everything that wasn't water she'd brush her teeth after. Like she was literally the cleanest person in the world, she described it as. So she like this went on for years. And at one point she just snapped and she was like, what the heck? I'm the cleanest person on the planet. Why are you still complaining? And he was like, well, when I was a lot younger, my dad sat me down and he told me that if I like demean you or demean my partner just a little bit, that you'll be so insecure that you won't leave me for anybody else. So for 2 years, he just consistently lied to her and manipulated the situation.
Guys are cool.
Guys are gross.
I'd be so interested if women started adopting some of these strategies.
Yeah.
Just to be like, hey, Brad, you look great. So much less chubby than when you were a kid.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And really bring down, like, their self-worth.
I think that would make for a lot more violence.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Okay, one last survival signal. Discounting the word no. So actions are far more eloquent and credible than words, particularly a short and undervalued word like no. Particularly when it's offered tentatively or without conviction. So when Kelly says no to this person, but then agreed, it wasn't really a no anymore. No was a word that must never be negotiated because the person who chooses not to hear it is trying to control you. In situations in which unsolicited offers of assistance are appropriate, such as approaches by a salesman or flight attendant, it is simply annoying if you have to decline 3 times. With a stranger, however, refusal to hear no can be an important survival signal, as with a suitor, a friend, a boyfriend, or even a husband. Declining to hear no is a signal that someone is either seeking control or refusing to relinquish it. With strangers, even those with the best intentions, never ever relent on the issue of no, because it sets the stage for more efforts to control. If you let someone talk you out of the word no, you might as well wear a sign that reads, "You are in charge." The worst response when someone fails to accept no is to give ever-weakening refusals and then give in. Another common response that serves a criminal is to negotiate, such as saying, "I really appreciate your offer, but let's try to do it on my own first." Negotiation is about possibility, and providing access to someone who makes you apprehensive is not a possibility you want to keep on the agenda. No is a complete sentence. The criminal's process of victim selection is similar to a shark circling potential prey. The predatory criminal of every variety is looking for someone, a vulnerable someone who will allow him to be in control, and just as he constantly gives signals, so does he read them. So if someone approaches a woman, for instance, in a dark parking garage, who's putting groceries into the trunk of her car, they may be looking for a victim. They may be nice too, but if she says, "I don't want your help," and he continues, that's when you should be concerned. A decent man would understand her reaction, or, more likely, wouldn't have approached a woman alone in the first place unless she really had an obvious need. If a man doesn't understand the reaction and stomps off dejected, that's fine too. In fact, any reaction, even anger from a decent man with no sinister intent, is preferable to continued attention from a violent man who might have used your concern about rudeness to his advantage. I want to clarify that many men offer help without any sinister or self-serving intent, with no more in mind than kindness and chivalry, but I've been addressing the times that men refuse to hear the word no, and that is not chivalrous, it is dangerous. When someone ignores that word, ask yourself, why is this person seeking to control me? What does he want? It is best to get away from that person altogether, but if that's not practical, the response that serves safety is to dramatically raise your insistence, skipping several levels of politeness. I said no. Does that make sense?
So aggressive. I wasn't ready for that.
So he gives an example of like how all these strategies are used in the wild. And so he describes a couple of scenarios in the book, and some of them I'm like, okay, this seems like a real situation, and others, and this is me trusting my intuition, Naomi, I'm like, this seems like an anecdote manufactured for a book. I'll let you judge in this situation.
Okay.
So he says he was on a flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, seated next to a teenage girl who was traveling alone. A man in his 40s, who'd been watching her from across the aisle, took off the headphones he was wearing and said to her with party-like flair, "These things don't just get loud enough for me." He then put his hand out towards her and said, "I'm Billy." Though it may not be immediately apparent, his statement was actually a question, and the young girl responded with exactly the information Billy hoped for. She told him her full name. Then she put out her hand, which he held a little too long. In the conversation that ensued, he didn't directly ask for any information, but he certainly got lots of this. He said, "I hate landing in a city and not knowing if anybody is meeting me." The girl answered this question by saying that she didn't know how she was getting from the airport to the house where she was staying. Billy asked another question. "Friends can really let you down sometimes." The young girl responded by explaining, "The people I'm staying with, thus not family, are expecting me on a later flight." Billy said, "I love the independence of arriving in a city when no one knows I'm coming." This was the virtual opposite of what he'd said a moment before about hating to arrive and not be met. He added, "But you're probably not that independent." She quickly volunteered that she'd been traveling on her own since she was 13. "You sound like a woman I know from Europe. More like a woman than a teenager," he said as he handed her his drink, Scotch, which the flight attendant had just served him.
I don't like this.
"You sound like you play by your own rules." I hoped she would decline to take the drink, and she did first, but he persisted. "Come on, you can do whatever you want," and she took a sip of the drink. So he looks over at Billy and sees a muscular dude. He has tattoos, he had cheap jewelry, he was drinking alcohol on a morning flight, he had no carry-on bag, he saw new clothing, and Mr. de Becker assumes this person had just been out of jail. While he's looking at Billy, Billy says, "How you doing, pal? Getting out of Chicago?" And then, stops engaging with him. As Billy got up to go to the bathroom, he put one more piece of bait in his trap. Leaning close to the girl, he gave a slow smile and said, "Your eyes are awesome." In a period of just a few minutes, I'd watched Billy use forced teaming. They both had no one meeting them, he said. Too many details, the headphones and the woman he knows from Europe, loan sharking, the drink offer, charm, the compliment about the girl's eyes, and typecasting. You're probably not that independent. I'd also seen him discount the girl's no when she declined the drink. As Billy walked down the aisle, I asked the girl if I could talk to her for a moment, and she said yes. It speaks to the power of predatory strategies that she was glad to talk to Billy, but be wary of the passenger who asked permission to speak with her. He is going to offer you a ride from the airport, I told her, and he's not a good guy. I saw Billy again at baggage claim as she approached the girl. Though I couldn't hear them, the conversation was apparent. She was shaking her head and saying no, and he wasn't accepting it. She held firm, and he walked off finally with an angry gesture, not the nice guy he'd been up to then. There was no movie on that flight, but Billy had let me watch a classic performance of an interview that, by little more than the context, 40-year-old stranger and teenage girl alone, was high stakes. Remember, the nicest guy, the guy with no self-serving agenda whatsoever, the one who wants nothing from you, won't approach you at all. You are not comparing the man who approaches you to all men, the vast majority of whom have no sinister intent. Instead, you are comparing him to other men who have made unsolicited approaches to women alone, or to other men who don't listen when you say no.
I'm thinking back on this situation. I was waiting for my takeout order at a Panera Bread, and one time, and this 7-year-old guy came up to me and just started talking to me about my Doc Martens, and he was like, "Does that mean you can get on roller coasters at Six Flags?" And I was like, "I've never been on a roller coaster." And he just continued the conversation. He was like, "I worked for the FBI," and I was like, "Didn't ask." He was like, "Yeah, I can't wait for the day where I look at a person, I don't want to shoot them for wearing a mask." And I was like, weird.
So there's typecasting there, and there's too many details there.
But I'm looking back on every interaction now, and I'm just like, all of these interactions are so weird.
I was at a Goodwill with Lauren a couple weeks ago, and we were waiting in line at the register, and for some reason, all of their registers were down. They could only take cash. The digital payment system wasn't working. And so there was this line of people that was slowly growing, and they were getting unhappy as they were trying multiple things to restore the connection. And there was this older guy ahead of us, and he looked to be in his 60s. He was, pudgy, not in great shape, had 2 hearing aids in. I didn't think that he was hitting on Lauren. That wasn't my assumption. But he turns towards us and then looks directly at Lauren. He's like, "So I was buying pie at the store the other day." And I'm like, And he goes, and a lady comes up to me, and she says, if you cut it open, all the calories fall out. And I said, ha, can I reuse that? And she said, yeah. And we're like, because we're not holding pie plates. We weren't discussing pie. Warren doesn't have like a pie-themed shirt on. He just brings that up. And, you know, he shared something else, some anecdote I don't remember, and then, like, turned away. And it was, like, a really weird experience, but, like, I think he just wanted to, like, entertain himself by, like, sharing an anecdote.
Yeah, because I think that's Dad, too, because literally every single time we're at the grocery store together, he'll turn to someone in line who'll be like, oh, haha, like...
My son works in...
Exactly.
My daughter used to do swim.
No, I remember this one time we were at Winco. And I don't know if Winco's like a nationwide thing, but it's like a grocery store. It's kind of like a knockoff Costco, basically. But you don't need a membership for it.
It has a large... What sets it apart is it's a very, very large bulk section.
Yeah. And so we were at a Winco one time, and this guy was buying Jack Daniels, like a large amount of Jack Daniels behind us, and a lot of like wood chips. And our dad's really into like smoking meats. Yeah. So he's like talking to this guy. And he's like, you dip your wood chips in Jack Daniels? I have to try that. But like... This was after like a 20-minute conversation about like something totally random.
You know, wood comes from trees.
And pies, if you cut them open, all the calories fall out.
You'll remember that now, just like my kangaroo anecdote.
Smile.
Put
Joey.
Check for your Joey.
Turn around. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to bring up one last thing, and then let's call it a wraps on part 1. There's still a lot to get through, and I think we're reaching a good cutoff point. So there's a couple of general traits you should look out for when like your intuition is signaling something to you, and it's better to like describe them in detail so that you understand, you know, when your body is trying to instinctively tell you something. So on page 82, he calls them the messengers of intuition, and these are nagging feelings, persistent thoughts, humor, such as like something funny about a person sticking with you, wonder, anxiety, curiosity, hunches, gut feelings, doubt, hesitation, suspicion, apprehension, and fear. So if you're getting any of these signals, just like being around other people or reflecting back upon a situation, it's probably because like your body was indicating something to you about this conversation was off. There was some aspect of it that prevented it from slipping into the thousands of conversations you've had with people that you've forgotten in the past. And it could be that you're completely misreading the situation, but the fact at all that your body was trying to tell you something is indicative that it's worth, I think, looking into. And that's really the message here. It's you shouldn't discount your intuition, even if you're occasionally wrong, because the fact that you've noticed anything at all is the most important aspect. So, I think that's part 1, Naomi. I appreciate you sitting here listening to me ramble. I'm going to do a question and response part next time. Be like, Naomi, back to the kangaroos. Tell me about them. And I'm going to expect that you're going to pass the gift of fear test at the end of all of this.
Have a great week, everyone. We will see you back next week for part 2 of the gift of fear.
It'll be the same week for us. Nothing will have changed.
Yeah,
we'll be wearing the same outfits.
Yep.
We will not have any new anecdotes about what will have happened. I mean, the fact the Queen of England died in part 2, it's going to be pretty impressive.
Actually, she's not dead yet. She just left her castle for the first time this year.
I was really impressed by the fact that the Batman movie leaked early in part 2.
Stop.
And the fact they had Jim Carrey's The Riddler appear as like a cameo, I thought was really clever. Like, no one saw it coming.
I don't like Robert Pattinson as the Batman, but you know what I like less than that? I don't like Julia Roberts as the Catwoman.
I don't think we're getting better than that. Enjoy your weeks, y'all. We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at DateTheseGuys or visit datetheseguys.org. If you have questions for the podcast or want to be a wealthy sugar parent, send an email to datetheseguys@gmail.com. If you're looking to make an impact in the world, this show strongly recommends Planned Parenthood, a nonprofit organization that provides reproductive health care in the United States. Planned Parenthood provides birth control, long-acting reversible contraceptive implants, clinical breast examinations, pregnancy screenings, prenatal care, testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections, and abortions. They also do great work for those who are lower income. 4/5 of their clients are at or below 50% of the federal poverty line. Both Joel and Naomi are monthly donors to Planned Parenthood. We hope you will be too.